Lena, an 8-year-old girl, is trying to piece together the truth behind her mother's mysterious death. Her only clue? A drawing that might expose the real culprit. Will she have the courage to reveal what she knows? What do you think Lena should do next? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful and inspiring stories. Now, let's dive into Lena's story. A journey of courage, heartbreak, and the fight for justice. Lena sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her small hands carefully holding a blue-colored pencil. She was drawing a picture of a house, her house, a place where every room echoed with warmth and laughter. From the kitchen came the cheerful hum of her mother, Hannah, singing an old country tune. The scent of freshly baked cookies drifted into the living room, wrapping around Lena like a warm hug. "Sweetheart, come taste this frosting. Tell me if it's just right." Hannah's voice rang out, bright and full of life. Lena scrambled to her feet, leaving her crayons scattered across the floor. She darted into the kitchen, where Hannah stood, her apron dusted with flour. Lena dipped her finger into the bowl of frosting and tasted it, her eyes lighting up with delight. "Perfect, Mom," she exclaimed. Hannah smiled, leaning down to kiss Lena's forehead. "That's because I added something special this time," she teased. "A little extra love." This was Lena's world, safe, warm, and filled with her mother's unwavering love. Ever since her father's passing in a car accident, Hannah had worked tirelessly to rebuild a life full of joy for the two of them. Lena didn't know much about loss. Her mother had shielded her from the worst of it, but she knew that her mother was the reason their house felt like home. But their haven began to shift the day Victor arrived. Victor stepped into their lives with a polished smile and an air of confidence that made Hannah's eyes light up. "Sweetheart, this is Victor. He's going to help take care of us," Hannah said, her voice tinged with hope. Victor seemed perfect at first. He brought flowers for Hannah and small gifts for Lena, always with a polite word or a kind gesture. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His smile, though broad and friendly, never quite reached his eyes. One evening, as Lena sat on the floor coloring, Victor walked in and surveyed the room. His gaze landed on the scattered crayons around her. "Don't leave your pencils lying around like that, Lena," he said, his tone calm but with a sharpness that cut through the air. Lena froze, her small hands quickly gathering the crayons. It wasn't the words that startled her. It was the weight of his voice, the way it felt like an order rather than a simple request. Over the next few days, Lena began noticing other things. The way Victor seemed to quietly assert control, making small changes in their routine. The way he occasionally looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite place, like she was more of a nuisance than a child. Hannah, oblivious to these subtle shifts, believed Victor was the answer to their prayers. She laughed at his jokes and spoke of him with admiration. "Victor is going to help us, Lena. We'll finally have the stability we've needed," she said one night as they cleaned up after dinner. Lena nodded, not wanting to disappoint her mother. But as Victor's presence grew stronger in their home, the warmth that Hannah had worked so hard to create seemed to dim. And for the first time, Lena felt a shadow creeping into her world. A shadow she couldn't yet understand, but one that made her small hands grip her colored pencils just a little tighter. The warm atmosphere in the house began to cool, little by little. At first, Lena couldn't put her finger on it. Small things started to change, almost imperceptibly. Victor began asserting his control in ways that Hannah dismissed as helpful. He decided how much money they could spend, what they ate, and even when Lena should go to bed. One morning, as Lena reached for her favorite maple syrup at breakfast, Victor stopped her. "That's enough," he said firmly, pulling the bottle away. Hannah gave an uneasy smile. "Victor just wants us to be healthy, sweetheart," she said softly, though her hands fidgeted with the edge of her napkin. Victor's demeanor grew colder. His polite words began to carry an edge, and his sharp glances made Lena shrink. One evening, as she accidentally knocked over a glass of juice, Victor's calm exterior cracked. "Do you ever stop making a mess?" he snapped, his voice low but biting. Hannah immediately stepped in to clean up, murmuring, "It's fine, Victor. It's just juice." But Lena saw it, the tension in her mother's shoulders, the way her voice wavered when she tried to reassure him. It was subtle, but it was there. As weeks passed, Hannah seemed quieter, less like the joyful humming mother Lena had always known. She no longer sang while cooking, no longer spun Lena around the kitchen like they used to. Her smiles came less frequently, replaced by worried glances when she thought no one was watching. Then, one morning, everything changed. Lena was called to the principal's office at school. The knot in her stomach tightened as she stepped inside and saw Victor standing stiffly by the window. His face was unreadable, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Lena," the principal began gently, "there's been an accident." Lena's heart pounded in her chest. "Where's Mom?" she asked, her voice trembling as she looked at Victor. "She's gone," Victor said flatly, his tone devoid of emotion. Lena blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Gone? What do you mean? Gone where?" Victor's expression remained cold, his voice firm. "She's dead. It's over. Let's go." The words hit Lena like a slap. Tears blurred her vision as she stumbled backward. "No, that's not true. She said she was coming to get me." Victor's jaw tightened. "Crying won't change anything," he said sharply. "Get your things. We're leaving." That night, the house felt colder than ever. Lena sat in her room, clutching her teddy bear, her eyes fixed on the door. She kept waiting for her mother to walk through, to tell her this was all a terrible mistake. But no one came. Days later, Lena overheard Victor on the phone. She had tiptoed down the hall, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. His voice was low but distinct. She never listened. "I told her to get that car checked," Victor said with a dry laugh. "But it's done now. Things are finally falling into place." Lena's heart raced. Her small hands gripped the doorframe as she strained to hear more. "At least with the insurance money coming through, we can move on," Victor added. His voice was casual, as if he were discussing the weather. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her mother's accident wasn't an accident at all. The man who had taken control of their lives, the man her mother had trusted, was hiding something terrible. For the first time, Lena felt truly alone. The shadow that had crept into their home now engulfed it entirely. But deep down, she knew one thing. She couldn't stay silent anymore. Lena sat quietly in her room, staring at the bookshelf filled with her mother's old books. Her fingers absent-mindedly traced the spine of a worn-out novel as memories of Hannah filled her mind. It had been weeks since her mother's sudden death, and the once cozy house now felt like a stranger's home. As Lena reached for the book, her hand accidentally knocked over a small stack on the shelf. They tumbled to the floor with a soft thud. Bending down to pick them up, she noticed something unusual, a folded piece of paper sticking out from one of the pages. Curiosity piqued. Lena carefully unfolded the paper. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized her mother's familiar handwriting. The letter began gently, but with a hint of urgency. "Lena, my love, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me. I need you to listen carefully. I don't trust Victor. He's involved in something dangerous, something I can't fully explain yet. I'm trying to figure it out, but if anything happens to me, I want you to go to Grandma Rosa. She'll protect you. She'll know what to do. Please remember, you are stronger than you think, and I will always love you." Lena's small hands trembled as she clutched the letter, her eyes darting over the words again and again. Her mother, her safe, strong, loving mother, had been scared. And not just scared. She had known something wasn't right. Her thoughts raced. Victor? Dangerous? The pieces of her mother's strange behavior before the accident began to click into place. The tension, the whispered phone calls, the way she'd started locking her office door when Victor was home. Tears welled up in Lena's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. She couldn't cry now. Not when her mother had left her this message, a warning, a plea to be brave. Lena carefully folded the letter and tucked it under the stack of her old drawings in the bottom drawer of her desk. Victor couldn't know she had found it. That night, as she lay in bed, Lena clutched her teddy bear tightly. Her mind replayed the last line of the letter. "You are stronger than you think." Whispering into the stillness, Lena made a quiet promise to her mother. "I'll find out what happened, Mom. I'll go to Grandma Rosa. I won't let him win." For the first time since her world had fallen apart, Lena felt a flicker of hope, a fragile but determined light that began to guide her next steps. Lena lay awake in her bed, clutching her teddy bear tightly against her chest. The letter from her mother felt like a weight in her mind, the words echoing over and over. Victor is involved in something dangerous. She had read those lines so many times that she could see them even with her eyes closed. The house was silent now, the kind of silence that made every sound feel louder than it was. Lena's heart skipped a beat when she heard the faint creak of floorboards coming from the living room. She sat up slightly, her ears straining to catch the noise. It was Victor. His low voice, sharp and hurried, carried through the quiet. She hesitated, fear prickling at the back of her neck. But then her mother's words came to her again. "You're stronger than you think." Quietly, she slipped out of bed, her small feet barely making a sound against the cold wooden floor. The door to her room creaked softly as she opened it, just enough to hear more clearly. She wouldn't listen, Victor said, his tone edged with irritation. I warned her to leave it alone, but she just had to dig deeper. Lena's stomach tightened. Was he talking about her mother? There was a pause. Then his voice came again, lower but still clear. It's done now. The payout will come through soon. It'll cover everything. Lena's heart raced. Payout? What payout? Victor laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She thought she was so smart, but she didn't see this coming. Her hands gripped the doorframe as she tried to steady herself. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she forced herself to stay silent. Every word Victor said felt like a knife cutting deeper into her chest. Yeah, he continued, his voice colder now. It was only a matter of time. She made things harder than they needed to be, but at least now everything's in place. Victor's pacing stopped suddenly. Lena froze, her breath caught in her throat as she heard his footsteps coming toward the hallway. She hurriedly shut the door, slipping back into her bed and pulling the blanket up to her chin. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped right outside her room. Lena? Victor's voice called, calm but laced with suspicion. Are you asleep? She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart pounding so loudly she thought he might hear it. She stayed perfectly still, her teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. After a few tense moments, the door creaked open slightly. Victor's shadow stretched across the room, looming over her like a dark cloud. He muttered to himself before quietly shutting the door. His footsteps retreated back down the hall. Lena waited until the house was silent again before letting out a shaky breath. Tears streamed down her face as she hugged the teddy bear tighter. Her mind replayed his words. It's done now. The payout will come through soon. Whatever Victor was planning, her mother had tried to stop him, and paid the ultimate price. For the first time since her mother's death, Lena felt not just fear, but anger. She thought of the letter hidden away in her desk drawer, her mother's last words urging her to be brave. I'll stop him, she whispered into the darkness. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. The flicker of determination that had been growing inside her now burned brighter. She didn't know how yet, but Lena knew one thing for certain. She couldn't stay silent anymore. Lena's heart pounded as she darted down the street, clutching the letter tightly in her hand. The fading light of dusk cast long shadows on the ground, and every sound, a car passing, footsteps in the distance, made her flinch. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting Victor to appear. What if he knows I'm gone? What if he's following me? Her feet barely touched the ground as she reached her grandmother Rosa's house. The familiar sight of the white picket fence and the flower pots by the door offered a brief flicker of comfort, but her fear still gnawed at her. She hesitated at the gate, the letter crumpled slightly in her trembling hand. What if Grandma doesn't believe me? What if she thinks I'm just a scared little girl? But then her mother's words came back to her. Go to Grandma Rosa. She'll protect you. With a deep breath, Lena pressed the doorbell. The door opened quickly, and Rosa stood there, her warm eyes widening in shock. Lena, what are you doing here, sweetheart? Before Lena could speak, her tears spilled over. She held out the letter with both hands, her voice trembling. It's about Mom. I need your help, Grandma. Rosa immediately pulled Lena into her arms, her strong, protective embrace making Lena feel safe for the first time in weeks. Come inside, honey, Rosa said softly, her voice filled with concern. As they sat on the living room couch, Lena handed her the letter. Rosa's hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting of her daughter. Her face grew darker with every word. When she finished, she set the letter down on the table, her jaw tight with anger and sadness. She was scared, Rosa said quietly, more to herself than to Lena. She knew something wasn't right. "There's more," Lena whispered, her small fingers clutching her teddy bear tightly. "I heard him on the phone. He said something about a payout. He said everything's going according to plan." Rosa's eyes snapped back to Lena, her protective instincts kicking in. She gently cupped Lena's face. "You did the right thing coming to me, sweetheart, but we have to be careful. Victor can't know you're here." Rosa paced the room for a moment, thinking quickly. She knew they needed evidence, something that could back up Lena's story. Then an idea came to her. "Lena," Rosa said, kneeling down to meet her granddaughter's eyes. "Do you remember anything else? Anything that could help? Sometimes, drawing what you saw can bring back memories." Lena hesitated, her brow furrowing. I think so," she said quietly. The next morning, Rosa took Lena to see Mr. Alex, her art teacher. His small studio was filled with colorful paintings, the walls alive with creativity. When Lena stepped inside, the faint smell of paint and paper brought back a sense of familiarity. "Lena," Mr. Alex greeted warmly, kneeling to her level. "It's so good to see you. Your grandmother told me you have something important to share." Lena nodded, gripping her teddy bear tighter. I think he hurt Mom," she said, her voice trembling. "I can't explain it all, but I remember things. I can draw them." Mr. Alex's face softened, and he nodded encouragingly. "Take your time, Lena. Whatever you can remember is important." He laid out a large sheet of paper and a set of colored pencils. Rosa sat nearby, her presence a steady reassurance. At first Lena hesitated, but as the pencil touched the paper, the memories began to flow. She drew the car, its worn tires, the way it looked the night before the accident. She drew Victor standing by the garage, his expression cold and calculating. She drew the twisted wreckage of the car, a haunting image she had seen in the hidden photos in Victor's office. When she finished, she pushed the drawing toward Mr. Alex, her hands trembling. "This is what I remember," she whispered. Mr. Alex studied the drawing, his expression growing serious. He looked at Rosa, then back at Lena. "Lena," he said gently, "this is more than just a drawing. This tells a story that no one can ignore." For the first time in weeks, Lena felt a flicker of hope. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The air in Rosa's house felt heavier that evening. Lena sat at the dining table, her small hands trembling as she colored on a blank sheet of paper. She glanced nervously at Rosa, who was in the kitchen chopping vegetables. Both of them were trying to act normal, but the tension was palpable. Victor came home earlier than expected, the sound of his heavy footsteps echoing through the house. Lena froze. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach as he entered the room, his sharp eyes scanning every corner. "Why does it smell different in here?" Victor asked, his voice low and suspicious. Rosa turned, forcing a warm smile. "I tried a new recipe," she said, her tone calm but firm. "Something Lena might like." Victor's gaze moved to the table, landing on the stack of papers in front of Lena. His eyes narrowed. "What's this?" he asked, striding over to grab the stack. Lena's breath caught. She gripped the edge of the table, her heart pounding as Victor flipped through the drawings. When he reached the sketch of the damaged car, his face darkened. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. Lena opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her body felt frozen with fear. "It's just a drawing, Victor," Rosa interjected, stepping closer. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her protective anger. "She's a child. She's drawing what she remembers. Let it go." Victor's jaw tightened, and he crumpled the drawing in his hand. He turned to Rosa, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What lies are you putting in her head?" "The only lies here are yours, Victor," Rosa shot back. Her voice was calm but firm, her eyes locked on his with defiance. Victor stepped closer to Rosa, his frame towering over her. "You think you can turn her against me?" he hissed. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." The tension in the room was suffocating. Lena couldn't stay silent any longer. She stood abruptly, her voice shaking but loud enough to cut through the air. "Stop it!" Victor turned to her, his eyes narrowing. His lips curled into a sneer as he spoke, his tone cold and menacing. "You think anyone will believe you, Lena? You're just a scared little girl. No one cares what you say." Tears filled Lena's eyes, but she stood her ground. Rosa quickly moved to her side, placing a protective arm around her granddaughter. "That's enough, Victor," Rosa said firmly. "You're not scaring her anymore." Victor glared at them, his chest heaving with anger. He crumpled the drawing in his fist and threw it to the floor. Without another word, he stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls seemed to shake. Lena collapsed into Rosa's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I'm sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I didn't mean for him to see it." Rosa stroked her hair gently, her voice soft but resolute. "This isn't your fault, sweetheart. None of it is your fault. We'll get through this, I promise." But Rosa's mind was racing. Victor had seen too much, and his temper was boiling over. She knew they didn't have much time before he acted on his threats. Later that night, as Lena sat in her room, she heard Victor pacing in the hallway. His voice was low, but the venom in his words was unmistakable. "No one's taking this from me," he muttered to himself. "Not her. Not that old woman. I've worked too hard for this." Lena hugged her knees to her chest, her small body trembling. She glanced toward the drawer where her mother's letter was hidden, her mind replaying her mother's words. "You are stronger than you think." She knew she had to act. Somehow, she needed to get the drawings and herself to safety before Victor could do something even worse. The house was silent, but Lena's fear was deafening. She sat on her bed, clutching her teddy bear and staring at the crack of light beneath her door. Victor's pacing had stopped, but she could still hear his menacing voice from earlier. "No one's taking this from me." Her grandmother Rosa's reassuring words echoed in her mind. "We'll get through this, I promise." But Lena knew there wasn't time to wait. Victor was dangerous, and every second felt like a ticking clock. She moved quietly to her desk, her small hands trembling as she opened the bottom drawer. Inside, her mother's letter and the drawings felt like both a burden and her only hope. She tucked them into her backpack, pulled on her coat, and glanced at the window. It was her only way out. Lena climbed onto the chair to unlatch the window, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Victor would hear it. The cold night air rushed in as she pushed the window open, and she hesitated, staring at the drop below. It wasn't too high, but enough to make her stomach churn. "You can do this," she told herself, her mother's words repeating in her head. "You're stronger than you think." Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing louder. Lena froze, her breath catching in her throat as the door handle turned. Victor's voice cut through the silence. "What are you doing?" She spun around, gripping the window frame. Victor stood in the doorway, his sharp eyes narrowing as he took in the open window and her packed backpack. "Trying to run away?" he sneered, stepping into the room. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Lena's mind raced. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, trying to muster the courage to speak. I was just getting some air," she stammered, her voice trembling. Victor's lips curled into a cold smile. "Air? Don't lie to me, Lena." His eyes flicked to her backpack. "What's in there?" He took a step closer, and Lena instinctively backed up against the window. "I told you," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "No one will believe you. You're just a scared little girl." Summoning every ounce of courage, Lena looked him in the eye. "You're wrong," she said, her voice shaking but defiant. "Someone will believe me." Victor's expression hardened, and he lunged for the backpack. Lena didn't think, she acted. She grabbed the edge of the window and leapt out into the cold night. The impact jolted through her legs as she hit the ground, her knees buckling, but she forced herself to get up. Pain shot through her ankle, but she ignored it, clutching her backpack as she ran toward the garden gate. Behind her, she heard Victor shouting, "Lena, get back here!" She didn't look back. Every step felt like a lifetime, but she finally made it to the street. The air was freezing against her face as she sprinted, her small feet pounding against the pavement. Lena didn't stop running until she reached Rosa's house. She banged on the door, tears streaming down her face. The door flew open, and Rosa pulled her inside, locking it behind them. "Lena, what happened?" Rosa asked, her voice a mix of fear and urgency. "He knows," Lena gasped, clutching her side as she struggled to catch her breath. "He found the drawings. He wouldn't let me leave." Rosa knelt down, her hands gently cupping Lena's face. "Are you hurt?" Lena shook her head, though her ankle throbbed. "Grandma, we have to go to the police. We have to show them this." She pulled the letter and drawings from her backpack, her hands trembling. Rosa's eyes darkened as she looked at the evidence. "You're right," she said, her voice firm. "We'll go now, before he can do anything else." The drive to the police station was tense. Rosa kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting Victor to appear behind them. Lena sat silently, clutching her backpack as if it were a shield. When they arrived, Rosa demanded to speak to someone in charge. The officer on duty listened carefully as Rosa explained the situation, his expression growing serious as he examined the drawings and letter. "We'll investigate this immediately," he assured them. "Thank you for coming forward." For the first time in weeks, Lena felt a flicker of hope. As they left the station, Rosa placed a protective arm around her shoulders. "You were so brave, sweetheart," Rosa said softly. "Your mom would be so proud of you." Lena looked up at her grandmother, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and determination. "I just want the truth," she whispered. "And we'll make sure the truth is heard," Rosa promised. The courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation as the trial began. Lena sat beside Rosa, her small hands clutching her grandmother's tightly. Despite Rosa's reassuring squeezes, Lena's chest felt heavy. Across the room, Victor sat with a cold, defiant expression, as if daring anyone to challenge him. The prosecutor rose, her tone calm but commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about more than an accident. It is about deception, greed, and a brave child's fight to bring the truth to light." Her words hung in the air as she called Lena to the stand. Rosa gave her granddaughter an encouraging nod, and Lena walked forward, her small figure dwarfed by the imposing courtroom. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, her anchor in this sea of unfamiliar faces. The judge's voice was kind but firm. "Take your time, Lena. Tell us what you know." Lena took a deep breath, her voice trembling but steady. "I heard Victor talking on the phone," she began. He said the payout would come soon, that everything was going to plan." The courtroom fell silent as the prosecutor leaned forward. "Lena, do you remember anything else?" She nodded, her grip on the teddy bear tightening. "I drew pictures of what I remember. My mom's car, how it looked before and after the accident. Victor was near the garage the night before. He told my mom it was fine, but..." Her voice broke and she wiped her eyes. "But it wasn't." The prosecutor held up Lena's drawings, showing each one to the jury. The detailed sketches of the worn tires, the broken brakes, and Victor standing near the garage sent ripples through the room. Murmurs spread among the spectators, and even Victor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Then came the letter. The prosecutor unfolded it carefully, reading Hannah's words aloud. "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Protect Lena, I don't trust Victor." The tension in the room grew palpable. Rosa bit her lip, her eyes locked on Victor with a mix of anger and heartbreak. The defense attorney stood, his tone dismissive. "Lena is a child," he said, pacing in front of the jury. "Her memories are unreliable at best, and these drawings? They're just the imagination of a scared little girl." Lena's heart sank, but she looked at Rosa, who mouthed, "Be brave." "I know what I heard," Lena said, her voice firmer now. "I know what I saw. My mom wouldn't want me to stay quiet." The defense attorney opened his mouth to respond, but the prosecutor interrupted. "Let's not forget the expert testimony," she said, calling a mechanic to the stand. The mechanic's voice was steady and confident. "The damage to the brakes was deliberate," he testified. "It wasn't wear and tear. It was tampered with." Victor's mask of control began to crack. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering furiously, his face growing pale. The prosecutor's closing argument was concise but powerful. "This case is about justice. Justice for Hannah, whose life was stolen. Justice for Lena, who had the courage to come forward despite the odds. The evidence is clear, and the truth demands accountability." As the jury deliberated, Lena and Rosa sat outside the courtroom. Lena hugged her teddy bear tightly, leaning against Rosa's comforting shoulder. Every minute felt like an eternity. When the jury returned, the room fell silent. The foreman stood, his voice steady. "On the charge of tampering with the brakes, we find the defendant guilty." A collective exhale swept through the room. Lena looked at Rosa, tears welling in her eyes as her grandmother pulled her into a tight hug. Victor was led away in handcuffs, his face twisted in anger. He turned to Lena one last time, but Rosa stepped in front of her protectively. Not anymore, Rosa said firmly, her voice like steel. As the courtroom emptied, Lena felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she felt safe. You were so brave, Rosa said, kneeling to meet Lena's eyes. Your mom would be proud of you. Lena managed a small smile, her voice soft but filled with determination. She always said the truth matters. I just wanted to make her proud. And you did, Rosa replied, wrapping her arms around her granddaughter. As they walked out of the courthouse, the sunlight felt warmer than it had in a long time. Lena looked up at Rosa and knew, deep down, that they had done the right thing. The courthouse doors creaked open, and Lena stepped outside, blinking against the sunlight. The weight of the trial, the fear of Victor, and the months of uncertainty seemed to melt away as Rosa wrapped a protective arm around her. You did it, sweetheart, Rosa said softly. It's over now. Lena looked up at her grandmother, her small face showing a mixture of relief and exhaustion. But I still miss Mom, she whispered. I know, Lena, Rosa replied, her voice trembling with emotion. I miss her too, but she'd be so proud of you. And now we get to make a new start, together. The drive home was quiet, but not heavy. For the first time in months, Lena felt a glimmer of hope. As they pulled into Rosa's driveway, the sight of her grandmother's cozy house, with its flower pots on the porch and the familiar scent of freshly baked cookies wafting through the air, brought a sense of comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. That evening, as Lena sat at the dining table, Rosa placed 2 steaming mugs of hot cocoa in front of them. We've been through a lot, Rosa began, her voice steady but gentle. But we're going to take it one day at a time. You're safe here, Lena. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. Lena nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. I still hear his voice sometimes, she admitted, her voice trembling. It's like he's still there. Rosa reached across the table, placing her hand over Lena's. He's gone now, sweetheart, and if those memories come back, we'll face them together. You're not alone anymore. In the weeks that followed, Lena began the slow journey of healing. Rosa enrolled her in therapy, where she talked about the fear and sadness she had kept bottled up for so long. Though the sessions were hard at first, Lena slowly started to find her voice again. She also returned to school, where Mr. Alex greeted her warmly. We've missed you, Lena, he said, kneeling to meet her gaze. The art room hasn't been the same without you. At first, Lena was hesitant to pick up a pencil, but with Mr. Alex's encouragement, she started drawing again, using art as a way to process her emotions. One afternoon, she created a painting of a sunny field filled with wildflowers, her mother's favorite place. When she showed it to Mr. Alex, he smiled, his eyes shining with pride. This is beautiful, Lena, he said. Your art has a way of telling stories that words can't. Don't ever stop creating. At home, Rosa worked tirelessly to make Lena feel safe and loved. She transformed her spare bedroom into Lena's sanctuary, painting the walls a soft lavender and hanging twinkling fairy lights around the windows. The shelves were filled with books, art supplies, and framed photos of Lena and her mother. One evening, as Lena was sketching on her bed, Rosa knocked gently on the door. Can I come in? Of course, Lena said, setting her pencil down. Rosa entered with a small wooden box in her hands. I found this while cleaning the attic, she said, placing it on the bed. Lena opened the box to find old photos of her mother, laughing, holding a younger Lena, and standing in a field of flowers. Beneath the photos was a delicate silver bracelet with a tiny heart charm. It was your mom's, Rosa explained, her voice thick with emotion. She wore it every day. I think she'd want you to have it now. Lena's fingers trembled as she fastened the bracelet around her wrist. Thank you, Grandma, she whispered, her voice barely audible. As Lena grew stronger, she found herself wanting to do more. One afternoon, she approached Rosa with determination in her eyes. I want to tell my story, she said. Rosa looked at her curiously. What do you mean? Through my art, Lena explained. I want to help other kids like me. I want them to know they're not alone. Rosa smiled, her heart swelling with pride. That's a beautiful idea, sweetheart, and I'll help you however I can. Together, they worked on a series of paintings and writings that told Lena's journey, from fear and loss to healing and hope. Her art was displayed at a local community center, and the opening night drew a crowd of families, teachers, and friends. In the center of the exhibit was a painting of Hannah, standing in a vibrant field of flowers, her arms outstretched in an embrace. Below it, a plaque read, "In memory of Hannah. Her love gave me the courage to find my voice." As people walked through the exhibit, many stopped to share their thoughts with Lena and Rosa. One mother, holding her child's hand, wiped away tears. "Your story gives me hope," she said softly. A young boy, barely older than Lena, looked up at her and said, "I want to draw like you someday." Lena smiled, her heart swelling with both pride and humility. As the evening wound down, Rosa leaned down to whisper in Lena's ear, "You've come so far, sweetheart. Your mom would be so proud of you." Lena looked up at her grandmother, her voice steady and filled with determination. "We've come so far, Grandma, and this is just the beginning." Thank you for watching Lena's heartfelt journey of courage, healing, and hope. If this story touched you, please give the video a thumbs up, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration today, and hit that subscribe button to join us for more meaningful stories. Your support means the world to us and helps our team keep creating content that uplifts and inspires. Together, let's spread kindness and hope, one story at a time.